have a look at what you're saving, have a look at what your rent is, add them together, see what that looks like and what that will compare to a mortgage repayment. If it's less, then we calculate how much you need to save extra to practice a mortgage repayment and borrowing costs and body corporate insurances. That's what I do with a lot of my clients. So the game plan for 1 to 2 years and when they're wanting to buy. What is your current situation? What are you putting away? What do you need to change to pretend essentially that you're paying off a mortgage? Because the best part is when you can practice before having the real thing.
The Get Rich Slow Club podcast is a collaboration between Tash from Tash Invest and Anna from Perla. The Get Rich Slow Club acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on. From coast to coast, across land, waters, and communities, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Any advice is general and does not consider your financial situation, needs, or objectives, so consider whether it's appropriate for you.
Welcome to the Get Rich Slow Club podcast,
where we take you from beginner to confident investor,
where we can teach you everything you need to know about investing.
So come get rich slow with us.
Hello and welcome back. We've got another fun episode with Maddie Walton from The Money Lounge. She is a mortgage broker. We're going to chat about how to increase your borrowing capacity or things to do to avoid decreasing your borrowing capacity. But first, money wins, money losses. Do you want to go first, Maddie?
I'm up again. My money win would be that I just had my launch party over the weekend for the business. It's been operating for 5 months now, but just had my launch party. It obviously takes a little bit to get off the ground. And although it was an expensive cost, it was definitely an investment that I had a lot of fun with and technically also a tax deduction as well.
Yes.
So helps me from that. And I feel like I could go math that any day of the week. So I had a really good time. You flew up from Melbourne and it was a really special event. I had a lot of fun with a lot of my clients, referral partners, friends, family. It was just a really beautiful event. So spent a lot of money on it, but it was a really wholesome day and I really loved it.
And it looked beautiful.
Good.
Yeah. Lots of things go wrong.
It gave
with
me
events,
lots of FOMO.
It was, you should have come up next time.
Next launch.
Next launch.
Oh, me. Everyone's looking at me. Kids in school, you have to buy every teacher a present, right? Like this is the big thing.
Do you have to buy a teacher a present? Is that like
it's kind of the thing, right? Like it's end of year, it's Christmas. So my kids go to early childhood education, so childcare, and they go to kinder. So there's a lot of teachers between the two of them. But there's this amazing app that I just came across called Group Together. And what you can do is have a virtual kind of card for the teachers and everyone puts in money and then you can give them like a group present that's bought or
that's really cool.
A gift card, which I think is so much better because I've talked to some of the educators who I'm really sick of getting chocolate all the time.
Yeah.
Especially in this heat. I can't imagine how many boxes of chocolates they get. I used to always just buy them like a little bottle of champagne because I thought, hey, that's good for the holidays. And if they don't drink, they can re-gift. But it always stresses me out getting gifts. So anyways,
awesome.
Group Together. There you go. Someone sets it up. Everyone puts in a beautiful note. You can put some photos and done. No stress.
Amazing. I like that as well because then you can actually get something decent with it if they've got like 20 or 30 parents putting money in.
Yeah. Instead of like, $20 per like
chocolates.
$20 of chocolates for I don't know how many 8 educators between my kids or 10 educators. That's a lot. Not that they don't deserve it. They absolutely do. To clarify,
I mean, imagine every parent like of the kids that they teach. It's like 20 a class or something.
Because when you're in like primary school, you have one teacher, so it's a lot easier. But not when there's like multiple of them.
Yeah. And then what do you get them? Right? You want them to get something good, like
and then like asking your 5-year-old, what is your teacher like?
Yeah,
chocolate.
Yeah, you paid attention. Yeah. My money win, when I came up to the Gold Coast for your business launch party, Emma came up with me as well from the Broke Generation. We were looking at flights home on the Sunday, but they were quite expensive. So we looked at an extra night accommodation and it was cheaper to stay the night and fly out on the Monday instead of the Sunday. So money win, we got an extra night of a holiday. Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. And we got it on Luxury Escape. So I had a $50 referral credit for signing up again. And I also had 10% off using gift cards. So I feel like it was all the money wins.
So good.
Yeah.
We love the stacking of the money wins.
Lots of wins.
Yeah, exciting.
Yeah, I love that.
Let's get into today's episode. So borrowing capacity, what is it?
Essentially, it's how much can you afford from a mortgage, from a bank?
How much you're allowed to borrow? Is that kind of what it is? How much they'll give you? Yeah.
How much they'll give you. What are they going to give you? What do they think you can afford in repayments, which will then equate to what loan size you can get from a bank.
What kind of things do they take into consideration?
Lots of things, but essentially it's the big 3, I guess, is your income, your expenses, and your debts. And a lot of things can kind of weasel their way between a lot of them. So, for instance, there are some expenses that they do consider outside of your everyday standard expenses. They kind of sit between expenses and debts. One of them is private health insurance. If you are above the Medicare levy surcharge threshold and you have to pay a Medicare levy surcharge, they basically, a bank will look at your everyday expenses and they basically look at your income, your demographic, and they go, this is approximately how much they should be spending on a monthly basis. If you spend less than this, they will still take that everyday average expense.
Oh, interesting.
So if you're spending more than that though, they will take the higher of the two essentially. But then they add on to that any extra expenses that they kind of consider as fixed expenses / debt. So private health insurance is one of them. Body corporate is another, which I find interesting. Some banks are now starting to include it within those everyday expenses because instead of being added on top, because when it's added on top, it reduces borrowing capacity because they basically see less disposable income for you to put towards a mortgage repayment. But body corporate is very similar to council rates and they're within the everyday expenses that they consider.
Very odd.
So some are starting to now to move body corporate across, but body corporate is one. Child support, private school expenses as well. These are fixed costs. You can't just go, oh, well, I'm not going to pay the private school fees this month.
Oh, okay. So it's like the everyday ones
they
are
could
like,
go to public. They're just an add-on cost. So kind of things that are fixed costs that you can't really change or get out of if you don't want to.
yeah, okay. So the other ones are more like you could spend less on food. You could spend less on travel.
Correct.
Okay. So they're more lenient
You
on
could
that.
spend less on electricity and they're more variable, right? Gas. Yeah, it's all like life insurance, TPD, all those insurances, fixed costs, can't really easily change them or change providers or things like that. Or if you have them, same thing, private health. If you're earning over 95, I think, $95,000 a year, you're going to pay the surcharge anyway. So they're going to charge you. They're going to go, well, you got to pay that at the end of the year anyway. So this is a fixed cost for you that you can't really change.
Okay. So it's income, expenses, the debts you have, and like kind of what that leftover amount is, like what you can afford to
so
pay
that
off
leftover amount, then they convert that to what repayments would be and how much would they give you with a buffer. There's a 3% buffer on interest rates. And then that will revert to what is the loan amount that they will give you.
How far back do they look at your expenses to decide?
Some won't even look at all.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Some banks will want every single bank statement for the last 6 months of every bank that you've transferred in and out of. Some won't even ask for bank statements.
Okay, interesting. So if you want to try and like decrease your expenses, can you do that for 6 months to get
absolutely can.
to borrow more?
It's all about, I go through your expenses, so don't think you're not going to give me your statements. I will be sifting through them with a fine tooth comb, but I have to declare what you are spending every month on average. So I tend to use a online portal and tool that's government backed that will take your expenses for the last 6 months and give me the average of everything you spend. So I will sift through that manually as well, but it just gives me a nice overview and it can help me also go, hey, these are your expenses. This is maybe a little bit more above the average of what a bank will expect, but also what's that going to look like and what is your disposable income and can you afford the mortgage that maybe a bank will give you? But on my personal beliefs of what I'm seeing, can you prove to me that you can afford this mortgage and it's not going to be breaking your bank and you're not going to be stressed and that kind of thing. So there is definitely a difference between what a bank will give you versus what you should get.
Yes.
For sure. Affordability is huge.
I always think it's like the few times that I've gone for what I could get in a mortgage, I was always blown away with the large amount of money. Like I'm always like, oh, that is way too much. Is that does that sound normal? Like, do people feel that that's the case? Because I always feel like it's so overextended from what.
You probably won't feel like that anymore. Not
really?
With the way the rates are now.
Is it because of the
rates? 2%. Yeah, the rates were so low because it goes off your repayments.
Right.
So now that the repayments are higher, like my repayments have doubled, right? Essentially, my borrowing capacity is halved.
Yeah,
Most people's have halved.
That's fair. That's a fair comment, actually, because I've always borrowed when interest rates were really low.
Yeah, so disposable income is the thing out of all of it. So if the interest rates decrease and you're on a variable rate, your repayments decrease and therefore your borrowing capacity goes up. So next year, if the rates start to come down, people's borrowing capacities will go up.
Okay, so the first one on our list is wait for rates to decrease and your borrowing capacity will magically increase.
But we can't time the market.
No, but also remember everyone's going to be in the same boat.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that's going to be a big psychological thing because if I tell you that your borrowing capacity is $500,000 at the moment, and then when the rate goes down maybe by 0.25%, it might go to 515 or 520. You're going to go and spend that 520 because your repayment is going to be the exact same. That's what you've already budgeted for, but you might be able to get more of a bigger property, but then everyone's in the same boat. So is it just going to drive up prices?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay. Now more things that we can like actively take control over. If you found your dream property or whatever it is, or you just want to borrow a little bit more, how do we actually increase our borrowing capacity?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's all really about those 3 scenarios and the 3 categories: income, expenses, debt. Now, we kind of touched on expenses and how they will always take their average of what they assume you'll be spending. Some banks, if you have a really detailed notes, they will consider lower than that. If you're like living at home, your parents are paying for everything and you can evidence that, but it's very rare and they like to be conservative at the end of the day. The other one is your debts. So if you have any car loans, HECS as well, credit cards, reducing your debts, because in Australia, they just consider that if you have debt, whatever your repayments are, reduces your disposable income every month.
And like whatever the limit is as well.
Correct.
I thought that
you could have a credit card that's got a $10,000 limit. And you may not use it.
Different from like in North America, right? Like over there, it's like the more credit card, like the higher your credit card is, the more you
look better because you can handle it, manage it, right?
So that was something that was very different here, where everyone was like, shut down your credit card or bring it down to like $500.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you can max it out at any point in time. Yeah. And so they'll take whatever the minimum repayments would be on that.
Yeah.
So
and with HECS, it's like, it doesn't even matter how much your HECS debt is. Correct. It's just like how much you're earning and how much you're paying back.
If you have a $10,000 HECS versus a $100,000 HECS, it doesn't matter because the HECS repayment, it goes off your income level. So the higher the income, the higher the percentage of your pay that you have to pay back the HECS. So they will basically look at your annual income. Let's just say that you're earning $100,000 a year. I think that's in like the 8% bracket. So then 8% of $100,000 is $8,000 a year you need to make in repayments. They will then therefore reduce your income by $8,000. So sometimes if you're on a higher income, that it will make a difference. So if you have a $40,000 HECS debt and you're, in the $100,000 threshold or something like that, and having HECS reduces your borrowing capacity by $30,000, well, that doesn't make sense to pay off, does it? Because you're only going to increase your borrowing capacity by $30,000, but your cash will reduce by $40,000. But if you're at $150,000 income and you've only got a $10,000 or $20,000 debt, your borrowing capacity could jump up by $200,000 by paying off your HECS debt. So it's all about what is your disposable income every month. So it's all about what the repayments are on your debt. So I have some clients as well that maybe with a car loan, for instance, or a personal loan, they've decided to make the repayments really high and the loan term very short, but they don't have the funds to be able to pay it off out of their deposit. So you could potentially refinance that to have a lower repayment per month and a longer loan term, and you could increase your borrowing capacity that way, because again, the bank looks at what your repayment is every month. Don't recommend that. Would love you to pay it off. I prefer that. Nice clean slate. But sometimes people are in those positions where they want to just increase it. It could be a tradie that's got one for their trade and for work, or it could be someone that has it in the business or something like that, so they don't want to get rid of it. But yeah, it's all about your repayments. It's not really about the amount of debt you have, essentially. Yes. Credit cards are a big one though. Yeah,
okay. So pay down debt, see what your borrowing capacity or your borrowing limits are on all of your credit cards, things like that. Talk to a broker about HECS and if that impacts you. But then what can we do on the other end, I guess, with increasing our income?
Yeah, so I mean, you can obviously try and go for promotions, pay rises in your one job. Look obviously at jumping around between jobs, seeing if you can get, move to another company that will pay you more. That's obviously one way. You can take on a second job. That's what I did to help buy my home. Ideally, you are in a permanent position because it's just easier from a bank perspective. If you're casual though, you usually need to be in it for at least 6 months. But generally, the bank wants to see that a second job is sustainable.
Is this the same with overtime as well? Like if you just did overtime for 3 months, would you be able to borrow more? Or will they be like, oh, you probably won't do that forever?
So it tends to be how long you've been in the job for, and you need to show that you've been doing it for a long time. So if you are permanent full-time and you do overtime, you get allowances. If the allowances are fixed, like a car allowance, a tech allowance, a phone allowance, those usually will be taken, no questions asked, because they're fixed in every pay. Overtime is variable though. So usually you need to show retrospective that you get it consistently. So if you've been in your job for 3 years and you do a lot of overtime and it's this time of the year, a lot of banks will only look at 3 months and then they'll annualize. So if you've done 3 months worth of overtime, they'll times it by 4 to get your annual income for the year, and whatever the difference is between your base and that annual income, they'll take as overtime. But some banks though need 6 months And even then, sometimes they'll want your year-to-date summary from last year, your income statement, and they'll look at the two and they'll take whatever's lower. So if you did a lot of overtime from July to now in November or December, but then you didn't really do much last year, depending on the bank and what they do, I obviously would go, okay, I don't want a bank that's going to ask for your income statement from last year because you didn't really do any overtime last year, and then they won't take that as income. So when you're a healthcare worker or in a field that overtime is very, very common, the banks will usually take it, no questions asked, because they know it's part of your job, especially if you work in a hospital or you're a nurse or somebody that does do overtime a lot and it's really consistent.
Is this the same with like penalty rates for afternoons and weekends as well?
Yes, that's considered as allowances or variable income. Anything on top of your base is considered variable income overall. It's kind of lumped together. If you can't say exactly how much it is per pay, it's just variable. Whereas an allowance, where it's a set allowance, not a allowance for penalty rates and things like that, that will be taken, no questions asked, and it's usually part of your package.
What about income from shares? Will my dividends just be considered like income like my job is, or is it kind of treated very separately?
Tax return. Need a tax return.
Oh, okay. So it's just like your total income.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They'll look at that. So but then you've also got to think that the more the bank's going to see, they're going to be asking more questions as well. So you got to then check on your tax return. What are your deductions and what is your annual income for the year and that kind of thing. So the only way they can really evidence that is through your tax return. So you can definitely take it, but if it's only like $1,000 a year, it usually won't make a massive dent.
But if you're living passively off of your income holistically, like, is that harder for someone who's living fully off of their dividends, for example?
Oh yeah, for sure. But then if they're living fully off your dividends, then
it's still your tax return and it is what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Do banks like devalue that a little bit? If it is someone who's retired, they've like invested their $2 million or whatever, they've got 80 grand a year in dividend income. Will they look at that and be like, oh, that's too risky compared to someone who's working a job?
Sometimes, yeah. But also if you're retired, how old are you and how long is your loan term going to be?
Yeah, that's fair.
So banks also usually over the age of 50, they will need a exit strategy, aka how are you going to pay this loan off? So then it's like, do you have enough to cover it from super? Can you downsize and pay the new one off with the cash that you've got in equity? There's a lot of things to play around with. But yeah, they'll definitely take dividend income. I have a lot of clients that have dividends from trust distributions, from family. They have quite big investment portfolios with shares. So then they have all of that. Also, you'd have to have it as actual dividends being paid out to you, not being reinvested, because then it won't come up on your tax return.
Yeah.
So it has to be realized gains. So that's really important as well.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
There's some other hack I kind of see talked about online by some of these property guys that are everywhere. Using using many trusts, I guess, to increase your borrowing capacity and kind of like hiding properties from banks. Does that actually work?
Yes, but it's a very long-term strategy. I don't think a lot of people realize that it's a long-term strategy. You need to know you want to employ it from the get-go when you start. And the reason that it does increase borrowing capacity over time is because we touched on briefly about negative gearing and positive gearing. So Tash, your property is positively geared. Mm-hmm. That means that the income that you earn outweighs the costs that you have associated. So you might earn $30,000 in rental income, but only have $20,000 in costs, including like insurances, interest, property management fees, all of that, every cost involved, but you're still in the surplus, right? Mm-hmm. If you were in a negative, say it's the opposite, $20,000 of income, $30,000 of costs, you're in a negative, and that's negative $10,000. Usually you can put on your tax return on your personal income and reduce your tax there. So that's called negative gearing, and that's a tax benefit. When you've got a property in trust, it's a separate entity to yourself. So if you have it negative, so the costs are outweighing the income of an investment property in a trust, you can't negatively gear that because it's not going against your personal income because it's not in your name, it's in the trust's name. So negative gearing is used a lot for servicing and borrowing capacity. So that's why sometimes when you have a investment property, even if it's negatively geared, your borrowing capacity does increase because you're using the rental income and that kind of thing, and negative gearing to reduce your taxable income overall. When it's in a trust though, until it is positively geared, it is not going to increase your borrowing capacity. It'll actually decrease it because you can't utilize negative gearing.
Okay. So you need something positively geared. So it needs to be positively geared.
So either influx of cash, you put a lot of cash in from the get-go, or you've got to wait until it's positively geared, because when it's positively geared, the bank will look at that loan, they'll look at the income, and they will ignore it because it's taking care of itself.
It's equal,
in
yeah.
trust, right?
I've heard of some people like topping it up with shares so the dividends then make up
Correct.
like the loss on their rental income.
Correct. So you can do it that way as well. But essentially there's just got to be some income and to basically cover itself. And the reason that's important is because a lot of people think that they could just magically buy their third property in a trust and they think it's going to do wonders to their borrowing capacity. But if you can't utilize negative gearing and you've got 2 properties already that you're struggling to service, how do you think it's going to magically create it for you? So that's really important. And the reason that works is because of the 3% serviceability buffer. So when you do have a loan already, they will put the 3% servicing buffer on those loans plus your new potential loan. But if they're forgetting about that loan, that's maybe at a 6% interest rate, they're not going to be calculating it at 9%. They're just going to forget about it because it's the buffer usually that screws people over with borrowing capacity. Because you're like, I can afford it. I swear I can afford it. I'm like, well, will the bank from a conservative perspective? So yeah, they'll basically set it aside. But the thing is a property, especially right now, is usually not positively geared. You're in a great position, but how long have you owned your property for?
Yeah, it's almost 5 years now. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it was very niche.
So usually people would do it for their first or second property, wait till it's positively geared and then buy their third, fourth, and then they'll keep buying in trust. But you've got to have the income and it's got to be positively geared eventually to make it worth it. You've also got to have enough cash or equity, obviously, to then make it positively geared as well.
Yeah.
It's all about positive gearing. So it's not just magical that you can straight away buy 10 properties in a year and it's just going to magically all take care of itself. It's all about positive gearing. And so I don't think people will realize that. They think that if they can buy their third property or fourth property in trust, they'll be able to buy their fifth one straight away. It's usually not the case. Ideally, again, this is where accounting and financial planning comes into perspective because also trust is expensive to hold.
Yeah, I was about to say there's like extra because you got to do a whole other tax return for your trust as well. So it adds up. When I was like getting quotes for it, it was like an extra $1,500 a year or something, like on top of what I'm already paying for my company and like my personal tax return. So it does add up as well. Yeah.
So it's and then you can't deduct the negative gearing off your personal tax return either. So usually people will try and employ it on their first or second, essentially, because then it gives the value of time, right? Making sure it's increasing in value because as it increases in value, the rental income usually goes up and that will usually start to support the loan. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic, but
Talk
it's
to
not.
an accountant.
Talk to an accountant.
Yes.
And if you are someone that hasn't got a couple of properties under your belt already, see if it's a good idea from the get-go for the first one, because then you can leave your borrowing capacity alone for the second one and then let it do its thing. You can always put a property into trust, but it just obviously costs a little bit of money to move the ownership around. So again, that's financial planning and tax stuff. Yeah.
My final question, unless Anna has more, is how do kids impact your borrowing capacity?
A little bit. Anna, how much do your kids cost you a year?
Too much.
Exactly.
Too much. I don't know exactly, but a lot. Yeah. And especially I think these first couple of years when they're in early childhood education and care, like it is very expensive.
Exactly.
And then it depends on if you have private school fees, which
they actually look at the age of the kids.
Oh, do they?
Well, yeah, if they're under 5, they'll be in childcare most likely.
I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised.
Yeah. Do they look at it like just by like what you're spending on the kids, or is it also like an element of, oh, you might need to support it? Like they might have other things that come up.
Sometimes banks won't even need the bank statements. They won't see what you're spending. But as soon as you say that you have a dependent, it's a hit. They'll just take off like 50 grand or something from the borrowing capacity. Again, it depends on your income. And it depends on the age of the kids, because if they're in school age, then you might have a lot less costs because you're not having all this childcare fees.
And they're about to leave sooner, maybe. Do they consider that as well? If it's like a 15-year-old, it's like, oh, you only have to look after them for a few more years, or it's just no?
No, not really. But if they're still living at home and over 18, they can be classified as independents, so not dependents. They won't impact your borrowing capacity. So I do have a couple of people that have, 4 children and 2 above the age of 18, but still living at home. And they might be paying board to their parents or something like that. And that's very common that people will be living at home for a lot longer after they've finished school. They might go to uni. But as long as you can just evidence that the kids are older, then they won't actually consider that child as a dependent on you.
I know I have a lot of friends who have been in a situation where they were on parental leave and then they've decided that they're going to buy a house.
Yes.
And that obviously impacts their earning capacity because they're not working or they're taking a whole year off. But that's something that they didn't consider because they have a job to go back to. What happens in those situations?
Really good question. Maternity leave, paternity leave, parental leave overall is a big one. Now, banks are still pretty good with it. They have decent parental leave measures. They know that you'll be going back to work. Generally, they need a return to work letter. And let's say that you are returning to work in 6 months' time and you'll be going back in a part-time capacity. They will take that part-time capacity and see back then when that happens, can you afford the loan overall? If you can, great. But right now you may be on unpaid leave, Centrelink, you might be on some paid leave. We essentially take all of that together, see what the income is, and we show them at each point in time what that servicing is going to look like, the serviceability and borrowing capacity. If you're in a negative, let's just say in the calculator, it says you're in a negative by $500 a month. $500 times 6, if you've got $3,000 in savings, yes, they'll be okay. So you basically need to have a buffer in savings, but you need a return to work letter. Now, the reason that's important is because a lot of people might be in a situation where they use a lot of variable income or commissions or things like that. You can't prove what overtime you'll be doing when you go back to work. So this is a big one for nurses, with the penalty rates and the shift allowances. They can only tell them what hours you're going to be going back to and what your rate is. They can't tell them how much penalty rates they're going to get. So they're not going to consider that penalty income. Right. Because they're going off prospective income, not retrospective. So sometimes that can decrease things. So yeah, it's different. So,
and especially if you're on parental leave, chances are you're looking after children. They're maybe not in early childhood education and care, but then once you're going back to work, there's that additional cost too. So that gets factored into how old the kids are, right?
Yeah. So they'll be looking when you return to work, how old are the kids? What are your costs going to be? And then also, what is your income going to look like then?
Yeah.
It's usually okay as long as you have the savings to cover the shortfall and that period of time while you're off to cover the negative. Really, that's all they really need to see in the savings accounts. But you really need a return to work letter. And sometimes it's a little bit of a pain. If you work for the government, they're not as fun. They're not as easy to deal with. So a lot of like Queensland government nurses, we struggle to get the letters from their, like the bigger companies. But yeah, you just need to specify when you're going back, what income you're going to be back on and in what capacity, part-time, full-time, casual, and that will suffice to the lender. They'll be able to calculate it, or I'll be able to calculate it from there.
Can you pause a mortgage if you're on parental leave?
Not really, no. I mean, you can go into financial hardship. Sometimes people will go to interest only. You have to have very good reasons to go onto those, and usually it's a hit on your credit score. So if you're not paying your repayments, there's usually, again, banks are businesses, why are you not paying them back? Yeah. That's all they care about at the end of the day. Why aren't you paying them back? So sometimes with like divorce proceedings and things like that, where there's going to be settlements, sometimes you can go to interest only, but you need a lot of evidence. You need the court orders. You need all of that for the bank to start considering circumstances.
So taking parental leave and taking a bit of a hit on income that is not sufficient.
The banks expect that you'll be preparing for that.
Okay.
They want you to prepare for having a child and having the money in savings to do so and to pay them back.
Yeah, cool.
So much to consider.
Yeah.
Gosh, so many plans.
Conservative. They want to be paid.
Yes.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. So yeah, it's increase income in any way you can. Extra jobs, promotions, decrease your debts is a big one. And the repayments on those debts. You don't have to when you go for a pre-approval. You can have a formal approval subject to you closing those credit cards, those afterpays, the buy now pay laters, the car loans, and they'll just need the evidence that those are closed before you find a property. And expenses, just obviously trying to wrap things up for yourself. And I just think it's important for yourself to know that you can decrease that so you can afford your mortgage long term as well.
With pre-approval, what happens if you get pre-approval, you go to buy a house, but then you lose your job?
Yeah, if you tell me, then I have to disclose that.
And then you won't get the loan?
No.
Crazy. Yeah, obviously it makes sense, but yeah, that feels so scary. Then what happens if you've already put an offer on the house?
Same thing with settlement. If you've already been approved, then you lose your job. If you tell me, then I'm like, you've got no evidence that you've got a new job. Like I've got to legally disclose that to a bank. If you've told me that you've lost your job and you've got another job lined up, you don't know what you're going to do, I legally have to disclose that.
What happens with the property then? This is slightly off topic, but if you're waiting for settlement to happen, does that mean you lose your deposit or something?
Conveyance question.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was like there's obviously penalties once you've gone unconditional. But yeah, like if you obviously then find a job and you can show you've got an employment contract and that kind of thing, usually you're fine. The banks usually don't look at anything after formal approval, so it's up to you if you disclose that or not. But legally, once I know something, So a lot of the time, a lot of people will not tell me they're pregnant.
Yeah, I was going to say.
As soon as you're pregnant, I've got to consider one. Even if they're in your belly, I've got to go, oh, there's another kid. So legally, I'm doing right by you. I have a duty of care and a duty of best interest. I legally have to do what's right by you from what you tell me.
We bought our house the week we found out we were pregnant. Started at Perler, and I can't remember, and my kid's birthday. So I was like,
big.
Yeah, didn't mention it because we just
Well, I mean, I meet a lot of my clients on Zoom, so unless I can see a pregnant belly and you tell me, I have nothing to go on.
Yeah,
but it is important.
So
to
take that with a grain of salt. But once I know, I will tell a bank, and I believe that a lot of brokers won't. Some people, I'm going to do the right thing by the law and by you. And also, if a bank's telling you can only afford a certain amount because now you've got a kid, if you want to borrow above that, what happens then if you can't afford that? And you come back to me and go, I can't afford this, but you told me I could, and blah, blah, blah. So I'm always going to take the conservative option. And I always think you shouldn't cap out your borrowing capacity. Yeah. Then make sure it's comfortable for you. And repayments, it's really important. So have a look at what you're saving, have a look at what your rent is, add them together, see what that looks like and what that will compare to a mortgage repayment. If it's less, then we calculate how much you need to save extra to practice a mortgage repayment and borrowing costs and body corporate insurances. That's what I do with a lot of my clients. So the game plan for 1 to 2 years and when they're wanting to buy. What is your current situation? What are you putting away? What do you need to change to pretend essentially that you're paying off a mortgage? Because the best part is when you can practice before having the real thing. So you can pay it off long term.
And then go see a broker.
Yeah, absolutely. Or see me then, and then we can help you in 2 years' time.
Yay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Thanks, Maddie.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this episode helpful, please rate us 5 stars, write a review, or share with a friend. If you're new to investing, make sure to listen to our first 10 episodes. Follow us at Get Rich Slow Club or Tash at Tash Invest or me at Ana Cristina.
This show was brought to you by Natasha Etchman, who is an authorized representative 1299881 of Guideway Financial Services, AFSL 420367, and Perla, who is an authorized representative 1281540 of Sanlam Private Wealth, AFSL 337927. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing. So make sure you check out our financial services guides and read the product disclosure statement and target market determination for any investments you're considering. See our show notes for more info.